Well, hello everybody. For those of you in the room, it's so good to see you. For those of you online, it's so good to look into that camera. Hey, I'm so happy that you're here, and in particular, I'm always amazed when people either tune in or they show up and you're not even sure what you believe. We call it being spiritually unresolved. I know it takes so much courage because you're kind of worried about what's going to happen, but we hope that this is a very safe place to explore a very dangerous message. And what I mean by that is the message, the life that Jesus came to teach has the potential to kind of turn everything in your world upside down, but this is a safe place to explore that. We are in a series, like we're 6 months in now. We're calling it Threads. And what we're doing is we're just backing up a little bit and from a 30,000 foot level, looking at this book. This book that has transformed cultures, this book that has been more read, published more times than any other book by far in the world. And even though it's written over a span of many centuries by different authors to different cultures and different continents, what's astounding is that there are these meta-narratives, these big threads, these themes that God weaves throughout that we'll see in the ancient Old Testament scriptures and then see in the New Testament that was written 2,000 years ago. So here's the thread that we're looking at this week. It's called empowerment. Empowerment. I don't think he's concerned with efficiency as much as some of us are. Because if you're God, you could probably do everything and do it really well all by yourself, correct? And he's not even a micromanager. But what God does is over and over throughout this book is he works through human beings, imperfect, fallible human beings like us, and he chooses to empower them for a task or for assignment. And we're introduced to this at the very beginning of the Bible. In Genesis, in the first 3 chapters, there's this beautiful account that God had created the vast expanses of animal life. And it says that he brought them to Adam to see what Adam would name them. So God creates, that's impossible, correct? None of us could do that. But God is so into partnership and he's so into empowering and working with human beings. Can you just imagine this parade? It must have lasted for days and days. This parade of insects and animals. And God looks at the animal and says, well, Adam, what do you want to name that one? And like towards the very end, Adam came up with duck-billed platypus because I'm running out of names here, right? But God says, I want you, Adam, because I have empowered you. I've asked you and Eve to oversee creation. I've asked you to rule over the fish, the sea, and the birds of the air, and over every creature that moves upon the ground. He goes, I've given you that assignment, and so I'm going to empower you. I want to work through you. I was reflecting back to an experience I had, I guess this is 20 years ago. Our kids really wanted a tree house. And I thought, well, that sounds fun. And I'm about efficiency. I'm about let's get this thing done as quickly as possible. So, it's a little bit complicated and a little bit dangerous building a tree house, especially when you're starting. So I'm working on this tree house and I will watch my 3 little kids at that time. They just stand up and look. And I think, this is for you. Kids, watch this. And then they'd start saying, Daddy, can we help? Can we help? And here was my first inclination. No, because you will slow down the process, right? And then I realized, wait a minute. The most important thing here isn't completing the treehouse. The most important thing is the process, and it's the relationship. So I have little kids, can you hand me the next nail? Can you guys hand me the board? Okay, you wanna drill it in? Okay, here we go. And everything nearly came to a halt. We just slowed down to a snail's pace. But in the end, this is what they said. When they looked at the treehouse, they say, I built that with my daddy, rather than my daddy built that. And I wonder if that isn't what God is all about. That rather than do everything himself, because he wants to be in relationship with human beings, he slows everything down. He brings us in so that we can say, hey, I built that with my daddy. He taught me. And the process is where I got to know him, where I learned to trust him. So here's how empowerment kind of works out. God empowers Adam and Eve, and they forfeit some of their authority. But there would be this phrase that it permeates the Old Testament. I bet it would be hundreds of times you would read this phrase. Time of crisis, a time of an invasive force, a time of deep confusion in the culture. This is the phrase, the Spirit of God came upon. And then it would be a prophet, or it would be a leader or a warrior, Deborah, Gideon, all these people. The Spirit of God came upon an individual. And then once the Spirit of God is there, there's this empowerment that's happening. Then the prophet spoke the truth, or the leader led the people. They moved out of oppression into freedom. So it's this ongoing, God is partnering with human beings. It happens throughout the Old Testament. Now, the passage that I want to read is found in John chapter 20. We'll start at verse 13 in a moment. And it's like this accumulation of everything God has been doing, empowering people through ancient history. And Jesus is sitting down with his disciples, and it is just this ultimate portrait of empowerment and partnership. Here's the context before we begin to read it. Jesus had died days before. And so, as you can imagine, this is an absolute crisis. It is induced fear and anxiety into the followers of Jesus. And where we find them is they're actually hiding. They're behind a locked door. Because here's where they're at. They had heard these rumors that two different people had seen Jesus. But they didn't know if they could believe it or not. Like, no, we saw him die. The empire won. The Jewish leaders, they got the Roman government to do exactly what they wanted to, and Jesus hung on a cross. We saw him buried. We saw a spear going to his side, like it's over. But these two individuals said, no, 3 days later, like we saw him. So they're gathered in this room, and here's the dominant thing they're feeling in this room: fear, dread, and anxiety. Because they're absolutely afraid. They're heartbroken, right? Devastated. They thought Jesus was gonna change history, but they're terrified that what is out there, outside of the locked room, is too big, too powerful, and they are afraid that the very powers that put Jesus on a cross might come for them, which would mean arrest or possibly execution. And so they're hiding in fear. And here's this beautiful moment where Jesus doesn't knock on the door, he just shows up in the room. And this is what he says. John chapter 20, verse 13. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came, stood among them, and said, "Peace be with you." We've got to talk about this word peace. So in Greek, it's this word eirene, and in Hebrew, it's the word shalom. It's very significant. If you've been to a liturgical, traditional church, oftentimes, even during the service, there's a time where they call it passing of the peace. And you turn to the people around you and you say, "Peace be with you." It emanates right out of this text. So Jesus shows up, just appears in their locked room, and the first thing he says to anxious, fearful, overwhelmed people is, "Peace, shalom, eirene." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. So they were very concerned that it was an apparition, that it was a spirit or a ghost. Jesus shows up in a room, but he has a physical body, and it's a resurrected, remade body, but it still bears the marks. The side where the spear entered and where the nails went through his hands. So he shows them this, that he is truly resurrected, not just a spiritual ghostly form. And the disciples were overjoyed. So they're fearful till they see, like, this really is Jesus. They're overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them. We gotta stop right there. Like, when's the last time somebody breathed on you? I mean, it's just kind of weird, isn't it? I have a bunch of Hawaiian friends. I was just with a few of them. And they have this traditional greeting, which is not COVID appropriate. But traditional islanders, the indigenous group, when they come together, they put their foreheads together. So like your forehead to forehead. And in Hawaiian, ha is breath. And ohana is the breath of family. They put their heads together. And I had one of the guys that I was with do that. And I'm just like super awkward, right? Like, Jesus, because why? It's terribly intimate, right? Like if I just came up to you after service and said, you'd be like, whoa, 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 right? So this intimate moment, Jesus breathed on them, and then he's to describe what he's doing when he breathes. Receive. So this word, there's a partnership, there's a receptance. Receive the Holy Spirit. Now this last sentence here, highly controversial. Interpreted throughout the Christian church in multiple different ways. So we'll talk about it. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven. So you read that and you're like, what? So be ye forgiven, right? And what is going on here? So this is this beautiful picture of empowerment. I want to break it up into 3 parts. Number 1, let's talk for a moment just about peace. Shalom, erene. What is happening? Well, there's a complete absence. There's a void of peace in their lives. And that's why they've locked the door. They've isolated themselves. And when you're in this position, you're pretty sure that what's out there is bigger, is more powerful, is fear-inducing. It has the potential to overcome and overrun you. And so they retreated to this safe place. And I think this is metaphorical for much of what the church has done at times throughout its history, is sometimes we see what's happening in culture. You watch the news, you see cultural trends, and it's frightening, it's overwhelming. So we have a tendency to lock the doors, create a subculture, isolate ourselves, and live in fear. Fear that what's out there is bigger than we are. Fear that what is out there has the potential to overwhelm and overrun us. I also think this can be a metaphor for something at a personal level, is that many of us, I think all of us, we have feelings of insecurity, isolation, deep shame. We feel like we're not enough, we'll never measure up, we've never been enough. And so we end up locked away in this room filled with anxiety, filled with messages that were failures. And here's what Jesus does. He steps into that room where we are choosing to self-isolate and hide. And he looks at us and he says this twice. Peace be to you. To your troubled, overwhelmed, overworked, anxious heart, be given a gift of peace. Now, in our English language and even culturally, here's how we think about peace. We think about peace as an end of conflict and busyness. And so imagine you're hosting a family reunion at your place. And it's just chaos, right? Because your family's dysfunctional. And your Uncle Al is nuts. And like there's fighting and political talk. And you're like, what is going on? And you think to yourself, when everyone leaves, I'll finally have some peace and quiet, okay? So that's typically our definition of peace, is like, if we could overcome the enemies, the bad guys, if we could change our financial reality, if we could get rid of all these dysfunctional people, if we could stop the noise and stop the busyness, if we eliminated all that, then I would have peace and quiet. But here's the Hebrew understanding of peace, this word shalom. It means that I can be at rest even though my context and circumstances do not change. So it's not an elimination. It's at the family reunion with all the chaos. that Jesus steps into my anxious, locked room and gives me a sense of well-being and trust and faith, where the fear and the shame dissipate. I'm in this position of like, I'm okay. My circumstances haven't changed, but I've changed. So peace is not changing your circumstances. Peace is you changing because we had an interaction with God who looked at us and said, shalom be to you. Your finances may not get better. Shalom in the midst of it. Gas may not drop below $4 a gallon ever again. Shalom. Your family may not ever be the model of perfection. Shalom. Peace. Jesus is the giver of peace. I find it fascinating that somewhere between 600 and 800 years before this upper room interaction, prophet Isaiah was anticipating and talking about who Jesus would be. And one of the names that he gave him is, he said this: when he comes, you will call him the Prince of Peace. Like a proper name. That he's one who embodies peace. He has peace and he'll be able to give it away. He can step inside of locked rooms and he can speak to troubled hearts and he can say, be at rest. Trust me. I'll take care of you. Your worry doesn't change anything. Just hold on to me. Peace. Here's the second big idea. Jesus was sent and we are sent. So what does Jesus mean when he looks at his disciples, speaks peace over their lives, and then says to them, as the Father sent me, I am now sending you? Well, this first part is fascinating because especially in the book of John, Jesus has this theme where you'll often hear him saying things. People ask him, what are you doing? He'll say, I only do the things that my Father asked me to do. I only do the will of my Father. And so Jesus fundamentally understood his life this way. It wasn't about his agenda. It wasn't about his 10-year plan. There's nothing wrong with those things. But he said, my purpose for being here on planet Earth is to do what my Father has sent me to do. So Jesus has this idea that he's on mission, and he's on mission to accomplish a task that the Father has sent him for. So Jesus then looks at his disciples and he says, I was sent, maybe like carrying a baton, okay? Some of my favorite and most tragic moments have been at junior high track meets. All my kids did track meet. And for those of you who live in Montana, it's either hail, snow, wind, or a sunburn. And maybe all in one afternoon. But my favorite thing to watch is the relay, okay? Listen, if you're a middle schooler, I just want you to know, I love you. But how many of us were super coordinated in middle school? So you've got uncoordinated middle schoolers, and here's the goal. Run as fast as you possibly can, and without stopping, hand a baton to another uncoordinated individual and see how fast you can do it. I have seen collisions. I've seen people fall down. I've seen batons drop. I would gravitate towards the relay races to here it goes. This is gonna be awesome, right? This is gonna be awesome. What Jesus is saying is this: my Father handed me a baton, and I ran with it for 33 years. He sent me on a mission. And now he's looking at these people who are locked away. He's just said, be at peace. And he says, as the Father sent me, I am now sending you. Take the baton. Move forward. I am empowering you. I am entrusting you. I'm not gonna build a tree house alone. I'm handing you the next steps. Move forward. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. And this, if it fundamentally was the way Jesus understood his life, imagine what it means if I begin to fundamentally understand this is how I live my life. Because I guarantee you, you'll wake up, if you go to work on Monday morning, you go to school, you go to the office, you go to the job site, you go to the hospital, whatever it is, you are going to do things that are terribly mundane. You have done them before. And they can be fairly lifeless and they can be fairly monotonous. If, however, this concept resonates in my life, I am not just going back home to my neighborhood or wherever it is. I am being sent. I am being commissioned. The baton that Jesus carried from the Father has been handed to me. And when I go to work, I'm not just there for a paycheck. I am sent to this place. Therefore, I have a purpose and a mission that is bigger. And trust me, this can change your life. Instead of just grinding it out, you're looking for opportunities because God sent me here. I'm on mission. The baton is in my hand. Who can I love? Who can I forgive? Who can I speak life to? The idea of being sent is profoundly different. You could probably summarize the last 2,000 years of church history of one generation of disciples handing off the baton to the next generation of disciples. And it hasn't been fumbled. We've stopped. There's been some ugly handoffs. But part of my job, your job, I want to speak to anybody who's over 50, because that's me. And my wife, who just turned 51 today. 41, sorry about that. Our job is to hand it off. And to see that next group, we're sending. Jesus sent, the Father sent, now we send, go, go, go. As the Father sent me, so I send you. And then here's the third point. Okay, we're focusing on this whole idea of specifically being empowered. So he's given them peace. They're in a locked room, and he's telling them, leave the place of comfort. Don't be afraid. You could be paralyzed. You could experience safety the rest of your lives, but I'm calling you to leave the room, be sent, go into a world that's scary and terrifying, but I won't send you without empowering you. This is just the beautiful thought that Jesus just doesn't ask you to do hard things and see if you make it. Go. I don't know how. Let me take care of that. And so this is where he breathes upon them and he says, receive. So let's go back to that word receive. Everyone in that room had a choice. Do I reject or do I receive? And Jesus says, open yourself. Receive the Holy Spirit. So what is going on? Why is this whole idea of Jesus breathing on people so significant? So the book of John is very unique in this way. Out of the 4 gospel books, the 4 books that biography of Jesus, John is the one that harkens back to the Old Testament the most often. John chapter 1 is a reiteration of Genesis chapter 1, the first book in the Bible. So the first book in the Bible begins this way: in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. John, what does he do? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And he's saying Jesus was there at the beginning, and his big theme through this book, in large part, is this: that Jesus came to recreate a broken world. So the only other time that we have God or anyone breathing on anyone else is in Genesis chapter 2. In Genesis chapter 2, it's a poem. It's a different telling of the creation story. And in Genesis 2, it says that God took the dust and dirt of the earth and he fashioned Adam. And so Adam is a biological entity, but he's missing something. And so it says that God breathes into Adam's nostrils. The Hebrew word is ruach, which is breath or wind. That God breathes, this terribly intimate moment, breathes into Adam's nostrils the breath of life, the ruach, and then Adam became a living being. The only other time we have anybody breathing on anyone else in the Bible. What God breathes into Adam is what makes human beings different than the rest of a created animal species. It's spirit, it's it's life, it's soul, it's vitality, it's the image of God. It's the capacity to know and walk with God. And God breathes it into Adam. So here's what John is saying. These were Hebrew people in this upper room. I'm scared, I'm afraid, I'm hiding in my locked room. And Jesus steps in and says, peace be to you. I want to send you. And then he breathes into them the ruach, the breath of God, so that a new human being can be created, a new type of human. One that doesn't just operate on their best intentions and work as hard as they can, but this is the type of human that can now be animated by the Spirit of God, who operates not in their own strength and doing the best they possibly can, but there's this divine partnership of empowerment that happens in the room. And whatever happened changed the course of human history. They went from a locked room to leaving that room, spreading throughout the entire Roman Empire. And within 342 years, the Roman Empire is going to abandon their ancient gods and say, we're following this Jesus, this rabbi who wasn't even a blip on the history pages of our empire. See, the Spirit of God breathed into a human being is the ultimate form of empowerment. It's God's breath flowing into me. So does this happen once? Does this happen daily? I think yes and yes. Is that God can breathe his Spirit into this terribly inadequate human being that I am. And when he breathes his Spirit in, just like Adam became a living being, you become a living being. There's something divine that God breathes into us. So that leaves us with these most difficult verses, the last verse we read, where Jesus says, after I breathe the Spirit into you, if you forgive anyone their sins are forgiven, but if you don't, their sins will be retained. So what is happening there? Because I don't know exactly what to do with that. So there's so many ways you can understand it. Our Roman Catholic friends, the beginnings of the whole doctrine of absolution of sin emanates in large part from this very text. So in that understanding of this text, the disciples, specifically the 12 apostles in the room, would have been the first priests. Peter would have been the first pope, okay? And so Jesus is endowing into them the capacity to absolve human sin, right? So this is where the whole idea of confession develops from, is that I can carry my sin and shame, I can go to confessional, and in privacy, I speak out loud, repentance, which is always a good thing, to a priest, and then the priest can absolve me of my sins. So that's one way of understanding this text. I think, considering the context, there's another way that I think is a more accurate way of understanding this. It has to do with this whole idea, right? As the Father sent me, I am sending you, and now the baton is passed on to you. It seems that what Jesus is saying is this. What happened over the last 3 years of Jesus' life, where Jesus lives out the life that Adam nor any human being after him could live out. He dies giving his life sacrificially to pay for a penalty that you and I couldn't pay. But then he resurrects and he's alive. Jesus is saying this. You are now the holders of this truth. I've given you the baton. Jesus is going to ascend to heaven. And he's saying this. If you don't take this baton and leave this room, no one's gonna know the solution to sin, because human beings are ingenious. We've invented all kinds of things. No human being has ever invented a sin machine. You just apply this to your neck and you quit sinning. Just put this on your head and you'll never feel shame anymore. God had to create a solution to sin, and he's looking at his disciples and he's saying, if you don't take this message, people will be stuck in their sins. But if you take this message, people can experience forgiveness, and then they'll pass it on to the next generation of people who can experience forgiveness. This is the passing of the baton. Don't stay in this room and let the world go on. What I've done with my life is changed every human being's reality. Move on, get out, pass it on, so that people can experience what true forgiveness looks like. I want to conclude with a question or two. Number one would be this: where am I living behind locked doors? It's like I'm pushing, I know, a little bit on inadequacies and failures and insecurities, on staying in places where I'm comfortable, of thinking us versus them. Where are the locked doors of my fears and my insecurities? And here's what I'm going to pray in just a moment. I'm going to pray that Jesus would invade our locked doors. And my second question would be this: am I operating in the authority and empowerment that Jesus gave? Because if I'm just trying to be a Christian and do more and try harder and be nice, that is going to be exhausting and frustrating. Or am I allowing the God of the universe to speak peace into my context, my situation, my reality? And am I receiving this breath of spirit that he wants to empower me with?